A huge gap from that perspective. Victoria, let's bring you in on the conversation now. What are your thoughts on this gender gap that seems fairly obvious?
I agree with what Sally's saying. I think it's actually widening. It's not getting better. And, you know, we were saying that before we came on that there's a definite gap of, you know, a deficit of $700,000. But men generally, typically, will earn one and a half times more than a female will over a 25-year lifespan, which, given that we were talking about before, we, you know, in terms of equality and pay packets, we're still very much behind the 8 card here, I think, because, you know, we've been voting all the rest of it for 100 years, yet we're earning considerably 30% less in some of those job roles. And I think we were talking about before about why does this happen and why do we have the deficit? I think that's our very first big issue there. But then it's also looking at, OK, well, how can we actually educate women? I think and the key is to get to them at a much younger age and not wait until they're 40 or 50 and then go, OK, well, where do you want to be when you're 60 or 70? And having a look at sitting them down and saying, well, if you want to be able to take a career break out from having children and then going back to full-time work when the kids are older, and then when you've got elderly parents, there's another career break there as well, to look at, well, how can we actually up your super this, you know, side of 40, so you then actually don't have the deficit that we're now facing, because it's substantial and it's a house or it's an investment unit. Absolutely. We'll bring the ladies back into the conversation. Victoria's got a few slides for us you'd like to go through, just in regards to what women can do, some strategies, some ideas, and some issues, I suppose, to discuss. Talk us through your slides, Victoria. Some of the things that we were talking about before, Maria was just a superstar in that space. Just to reiterate, I mean, look, I know she touched on a lot of these, but yes, we've already ascertained that there's certainly a huge pay gap between men and women. And we're talking about using nurses as an average. I mean, the average salary women actually take away in the workforce is only $44,000. And the other interesting thing is 70% of all primary carers for not only children but also elderly parents are women. So it's a bit of a tough gig in terms of, yes, we can bring attention to, yes, there's probably something on a government level that we can look at here in terms of looking at equality pay. I understand that. But then what we were talking about before, that I think some of the key issues are, it's not so much trying to get to women when they're 30 or 40 or 50, but what about actually looking at, we can actually get to primary school children and starting educating them around a wealth mindset, a financial mindset, and actually start empowering them around the value of money and how to plan for the future, because this is where we're actually getting into trouble, is women who are taking time out of the workforce, got young children on the hip, they're not necessarily thinking about, well, what am I going to be doing for my super when I'm in 40, 50, 60? They're just not, it's not relevant for them. So I think it's early education is really critical. My big things are, we also touched on this before, that in terms of possible solutions, I think, yes, that there is a care of duty from, I think, the government, yes. Employers, definitely. I think, again, it comes down to a level of education. When you have an 18 or 19 or 20-year-old sitting in front of you, to be able to go, well, you know what, are you thinking about family? Because not everyone necessarily is. If you are thinking about that, what's your time frame? If it's, you know, you're looking at taking a career break when you're around your late 20s, 30s, why don't you look at making a more sizable contribution in your 20s and 30s, so therefore you're not going to have that deficit of what you're talking about before, of a $700,000 gap. Doing some smart thinking, again, planning ahead. I think, look, putting my coaching hat on, given that's what I do, plan ahead, guys. You know, don't wait until you're 40 or 50 to go, oh gosh, I'm only going to have $50,000 sitting in my super, but what do I need to be doing? How then can I educate? I mean, you know, all the viewers watching out there, how can you educate your children and your grandchildren even? You know, it's a systemic issue that I think we have here. Well, I think that's a good point to make. I mean, we've got a lot of grandparents watching this show, and I think the grandparents should be out there starting to educate, spend some time, engage with these grandkids from a very early age and teach them some of the habits that you might have learnt. You know, your parents, if you're over 50 watching, your parents and their parents probably went through the Great Depression, and many of them were very, very tight with money and very frugal, and those habits need to be told to the next generation, and that needs to be passed on. You know, grandparents are ideal role models in doing that and partaking in that process. Sally, what are your thoughts?
I absolutely agree that parents and grandparents have got a huge role to play here in teaching young people good financial, good savings habits, because if you can install those habits into young people so they don't even think about it, you're going to set them on a great path in the future. And for the financial advisors I talk to say to me that too often there are parents now, because they've wealthy parents will just say to their kids, oh yes, you can have this latest brand, this, you can have your latest brand, that. Really, you've got to sort of teach them the value of money. So that is something that I'm really passionate about. But I also think that for young women, they have to start saving earlier because, as we've said, they take career breaks. So what can you do in your 20s to make the maximum benefit of compounding interest? And one strategy that I really love, a financial planner said to me a little while ago, she said, Sally, what women have got to do, you've got to have the 3-bucket approach. So in bucket 1, that's for all the money that your living expenses, so your rent, your utility bills, your food. So that is money that you have to spend. Then divide the rest of your income, your after-tax income, into 2 buckets, evenly. One bucket is your fun bucket, you can spend that. The other bucket is your saving bucket, and you have to save that. And you can save that perhaps in the bank for a little while until you perhaps build up, enough of a balance, and then you should put it into some sort of longer-term investment, like you might be saving for a mortgage, or put it into superannuation even at that young age. So I just love that. It's a practical piece of advice, the 3-bucket approach.
Now, you asked me a question about the Fin Review. I think it's being published this weekend or next week. You're doing a regular column on women and money, yeah? I
am actually. It's a really passionate subject of mine. I write a column called Her Money, which appears in The Age and the Sydney Morning Herald. And yes, we were just talking the other day about what women can do about investments. And one of the problem I think that women have is they tend to be too conservative with their investment approach, and they don't like this idea of risk. And they
Why do you think that is? I'm just curious, like, as opposed to men seem to be a little bit more confident in taking risks. I'm just curious. Why do you...
Same reason why men think they're better drivers than women, yet the statistics factually prove that women are better drivers than men in terms of insurance and accidents. Probably an overconfidence on women and underconfidence in women's investing, maybe.
Yes, it may be.
Just education around the investment side, which are holding women back?
Partially, I think women are sometimes naturally more cautious. I think that a lack of education also does play into it. So one of the consequences of this is that women are much more likely to put too much money in the bank, and with interest rates like they are, you're not going to earn, I think the maximum you're going to earn in a bank is 2.5%, which is really not much when we're talking about inflation. Core inflation is, I think, around about 2%. And you get taxed on those, your interest at your marginal rate, unlike shares where there are tax benefits, tax discounts. So you're going to be paying the full whack on tax, and B, the money is going to be eaten away by inflation. So as a long-term savings vehicle, it's not that great.
But then that also comes back to what we were talking about before about education and awareness, and that's the point where they should actually be outsourcing. I mean, my whole thing is if you're not strong in an area, go and get advice from a financial advisor, a financial planner, to actually upskill. So if you don't have the knowledge, go out and get it and plan ahead.
And there are also, even before you go to a financial advisor, there are actually all sorts of free information available on the web now. There are all sorts of websites, like ASIC has, I think that's called the Money Smart website. There's lots of information out there if you just want to sort of Google a few words and go and find out about what you can do.
Absolutely. Now, we are out of time. Before we go to the break, Victoria, you work with a number of different styles of people as well. You work in businesses, you work in individuals.
I was talking about before I came in. I mean, obviously this segment is particularly targeted towards women, but I've worked with hundreds and hundreds of women, whether they're in the executive space, corporate space, women wanting to re-enter the workforce again, as well as businesses. So putting my coaching hat on, given what we're talking about, if you're going to ask me for my #1 tip, and because you do, and
just about to get to that.
That is plan. Sit down, grab a pen and a piece of paper and plan out where you actually want to be, and then work out what resources you need to actually get to that point.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us. Victoria is going to leave us now. You'll find her at victoriamills.com if you're looking for a good coach. 1300 30 34 35 is the number to call, or you can email us super@skynews.com.au. We'll be right back after this break.